This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Scott Carpenter. The Nameless City by H.P. Lovecraft. When I drew nigh the nameless city, I knew it was accursed. I was traveling in a parched and terrible valley under the moon, and afar I saw it protruding uncannily above the sands, as parts of a corpse may protrude from an ill-made grave. Fear spoke from the age-worn stones of this hoary survivor of the deluge, this great-grandfather of the eldest pyramid, and a viewless aura held. Hey, Goliath. How you doing? Oh, this one? Secrets that no man should see, and no man else had dared to see. Still got to clean it because it's all this whole area right here is clogged up with nothing but resin. Its low walls nearly hidden, and these things right here work good, so it doesn't ash in your mouth. And while the bricks of Babylon were yet unbaked, there is no legend so old as to give. Hope you're doing good, Goliath. Recall that it was ever alive, but it is told of in whispers around campfires and muttered about by grandmams and attendants of sheiks, so that all tribes shun it without wholly knowing why. It was of this place that Abdul al-Hazred, the mad poet, dreamed of the night before he sang his unexplained couplet, "That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons even death may die." I should have known that the Arabs had good reason for shunning the nameless city, the city told of in strange tales but seen by no living man. Yet I defied them, and went into the untrodden waste with my camel. I alone have seen it, and that is why no other face bears such hideous lines of fear as mine, why no other man shivers so horribly when the night wind rattles the windows. When I came upon it in the ghastly stillness of unending sleep, it looked at me, chilly from the rays of the cold moon amidst the stars. And as I rose, I felt my triumph in finding it, and stopped still with my camel to wait for the dawn. For hours I waited, till the east grew gray and the stars faded, and the gray turned to roseate light edged with gold. I heard a moaning and saw a storm of sand stirring among the antique stones, though the sky was clear and the vast reaches of desert still. Then suddenly above the desert's far rim came the blazing edge of the sun, seen through the tiny sandstorm which was passing away, and in my fevered state I fancied that from some remote depth there came a crash of musical metal to hail the fiery disk as Memnon hails it from the banks of the Nile. My ears rang and my imagination seethed as I led my camel slowly across the sand to that unvocal place, that place which I alone of living men had seen. In and out amongst the shapeless foundations of houses and places I wandered, finding never a carving or inscription to tell of these men, if men they were, who built this city and dwelt therein so long ago. The antiquity of the spot was unwholesome, and I longed to encounter some sign or device to prove that the city was indeed fashioned by mankind. There were certain proportions and dimensions in the ruins which I did not like. I had with me many tools, and dug much within the walls of the obliterated edifices, but progress was slow, and nothing significant was revealed. When night and the moon returned, I felt a chill wind, which brought new fear, so that I did not dare to remain in the city. And as I went outside the antique walls to sleep, a small, sighing sandstorm gathered behind me, blowing over the gray stones, though the moon was bright, most of the desert still. I awakened just at dawn from a pageant of
Hey, Green Ghost, how you doing?
my ears ringing as from
Thanks for
some
stopping
metallic
by.
peal. I saw the sun peering redly through the last gusts of a little sandstorm that hovered over the nameless city and marked the quietness of the rest of the landscape. Once more I ventured within those brooding ruins that swelled beneath the sand like an ogre under a coverlet, and again dug vainly for relics of the forgotten race. At noon I rested, and in the afternoon I spent much time tracing the walls and bygone streets, and the outlines of the nearly vanished buildings. I saw that the city had been mighty indeed, and wondered at the sources of its greatness. To myself I pictured the splendors of an age so Chaldea could not recall it, and thought of Sarnath the Doomed, that stood in the land of Nar when mankind was young.
Hell yeah. Stop to do a little trimming.
Stone before mankind existed.
What are you trimming up, Green Ghost?
All at once I came upon a place where the bedrock rose stark through the sand and formed a low cliff, and here I saw with joy what seemed to promise further traces of the antediluvian people. Hewn rudely on the face of the cliff were the unmistakable facades of several small, squat rock houses or temples, whose interiors might preserve many secrets of ages too remote for calculation, though sandstorms had long effaced any carvings which may have been outside. Very low and sand-choked were all the dark apertures near me, but I cleared
Melon cake, nice.
crawled through it, carrying a torch to
Hell yeah, Green Ghost.
When I was inside, I saw that the cavern was indeed a temple.
Both those sound pretty tasty.
The race that had lived and worshipped before the death.
Hey, Rested, how you doing, bro?
Altars,
Thanks for
pillars,
stopping by.
all curiously low and absent, and though I saw no sculptures or frescoes, there were many singular stones clearly shaped into symbols by artificial means. The lowness of the chiseled chamber was very strange, for I could hardly kneel upright, but the area was so great.
Damn, hell yeah, Green Ghost. How you doing, Arrested?
I shuddered oddly in some of the far corners, for certain altars and stones suggested forgotten rites of terrible, revolting, and inexplicable nature that made me wonder what manner of men could have made and frequented such a temple.
It's,
When I had seen all that the place contained, I crawled out again, avid to find what temples might
hard
be.
to read this without my
Night had now
glasses.
approached, yet the tangible things I had seen made curiosity stronger than fear, so that I did not flee from the long moon-cast shadows that had daunted me when I first saw the nameless city. In the twilight I cleared another aperture and with a new torch crawled into it, finding more vague stones and symbols, though nothing more definite than the other temple had contained. The room was just as low, but much less broad, ending in a very narrow passage crowded with obscure and cryptical shrines. About these shrines I was prying,
So
the noise of a wind and my camel outside broke
So
the
I can get some
stillness
out
and
so you
drew me
get
forth
better
to
look.
see what could have frightened the beast. The moon was gleaming vividly over the primitive ruins, lighting a dense cloud of sand that seemed blown by a strong but decreasing wind from some point along the cliff ahead of me. I knew it was this chilly, sandy wind which had disturbed the camel and was about to lead him to a place of better shelter, when I chanced to glance up and saw that there was no wind atop the cliff. This astonished me and made me fearful again, but I immediately recalled the sudden local winds that I had seen and heard before at sunrise and sunset, and judged it was a normal thing. I decided it came from some rock fissure within the cave, and watched
Green Ghost.
to its source.
I'm still home right now.
Temple a long distance south of me, almost out of sight. Against the choking sand cloud, I plodded toward this temple, which is
Be nice to head back up there for harvest.
I would have entered had not the terrific
But
force of the icy
I gotta get my
torch.
money saved up for glasses before I can even try to save up money for the trip back or the trip over there.
More still, till finally all was at rest again. But a presence seemed stalking among the spectral stones of the city, and when I glanced at the moon it seemed to quiver as though mirrored in unquiet waters. I was more afraid than I could explain, but not enough to dull my thirst for wonder, so as soon as the wind was quite gone, I crossed into the dark chamber from which it had come. This temple, as I had fancied from the outside, was larger than either of those I had visited before.
Oh shit.
It was presumably natural cavern since it bore winds from some region beyond. Here I
that sucks, Arrested.
saw that the stones
Thankfully,
were as low as those of the
me and my
other
brother
temples.
have our medical card for it to have it and grow it, and it just recently went or passed for recreational. Oh, Gringos, my brother's is going good. He has that fruit punch runch going. It's looking real nice and sticky and stinky. And then the green crack he has going, it's definitely excuse me. It's definitely what you call it. It's definitely real stinky, and you can definitely it's real pungent too. You can definitely smell it. I have a green crack in my tent right now. They came from my brother because all mine I had going, I had to end up chopping them all down. I shall always see those steps in my dreams, for I came to learn what they meant. At the time, I hardly knew whether to call them steps or mere footholds in a precipitous descent. I don't know if it was a purple one, but it's a fruit punch runch that he has. You have to ask him to see if it's a purple one or not. From the land that men know to the nameless city that men dare not. Yet I hesitated only for a moment before advancing through the portal and commencing to climb cautiously down the steep passage, feet first, as though on a ladder. It is only in the terrible phantasms of drugs or delirium that any other man can have such a descent as mine. The narrow passage led infinitely down like some hideous haunted well, and the torch I held above my head could not light the unknown depths toward which I was crawling. I lost track of the hours and forgot to consult my watch, though I was frightened when I thought of the distance I must have been traversing. There were changes of direction and of steepness. Once I came to a long, low, level passage where I had to wriggle my feet first along the rocky floor, holding torches beyond my head. The place was after steps, and I was still scrambling down interminably when my failing torch died out. I do not think I noticed it at the time, for when I did notice it, I was still holding it above me as if it were ablaze. I was quite unbalanced with that instinct for the strange and the unknown, which had made me a wanderer upon earth and a haunter of far and definitely wish you were closer. I'd go over there and smoke with you, Rusty.
Flashed before my mind fragments of my cherished treasury of demonic lore, sentences from Al-Hazred, the Mad Arab, paragraphs from the apocryphal nightmares of Damascus, and infamous lines from the delirious Image du Monde of Gautier de Metz.
Oh shit, nice.
Uttered of Afrasia and the daemons that floated with him down the Oxus, later chanting over and over again a phrase from one of Lord Dunsany's tales, the unreverberant blackness of the abyss. Once, when the descent grew amazingly steep, I recited something in sing-song from Thomas Moore, until I feared to recite more. A reservoir of darkness, black, as rich as cauldrons are when filled, with moon drops in the eclipse distilled. Leaning to look, a foot might pass. Down through that chasm I saw beneath, as far as vision could explore.
Hell yeah, Richard.
Smooth as glass. Just varnished. The seat of death throws out upon its slimy shore.
That hit kind of hurt.
Time had quite ceased to exist when my feet again felt the level floor. I found myself in a place rooms of two smaller towns, now so incalculably far above my head. I could not quite stand, but could kneel upright, and in the dark I shuffled and crept hither and thither at random.
That one's up.
That I was in a
definitely not too bad.
Whose walls were lined with cases of wood having glass
It's
fronts.
pretty tasty and
abysmal place I felt of such things.
Yeah, you gotta be careful. Make sure you don't take too big a hit because they definitely reach out and grab you.
Cases were apparently ranged along each side of the passage at regular intervals, and were oblong and horizontal, hideously like coffins in shape and size. When I tried to move two or three for further examination, I found that they were firmly fastened. I saw that the passage was a long one, so floundered ahead rapidly, in a creeping run that would have seemed horrible had any eye watched me in blackness, crossing from side to side occasionally to feel of my surroundings, and be sure that the walls and rows of cases still stretched on. Man is so used to thinking visually that I almost forgot the darkness and pictured the endless corridor of wood and glass in its low-studded monotony as though I saw it. And then in a moment, indescribable emotion. Just when my fancy merged into real sight, I cannot tell. But there came a gradual glow ahead, and all at once I knew that I saw the dim outlines of a corridor and of cases revealed by some unknown subterranean phosphorescence. For a little while, all was exactly as I had imagined it, since the glow was very faint. But as I mechanically kept stumbling ahead into the stronger light, I realized that my fancy had been but feeble. This hall was no relic of crudity like the temples in the city above, but a monument of the most magnificent and exotic art. Rich, vivid, and daringly fantastic designs and pictures formed a continuous scheme of mural paintings whose lines and colors were beyond description. The cases were of a strange golden wood, with fronts of exquisite glass, and containing the mummified forms of creatures outreaching in grotesqueness the most chaotic dreams of mankind. To convey any idea of these monstrosities is impossible. They were of the reptile kind, with body lines suggesting sometimes the crocodile, sometimes the seal, but more often nothing of which either the naturalist or the paleontologist ever heard. In size they approximated a small man. Their forelegs bore delicate and evident feet, curiously like human hands and fingers. But strangest of all were their heads, which presented a contour violating all known biological principles. To nothing can such things be well compared. In one flash I thought of comparisons as varied as the cat, the bullfrog, the mythic satyr, and the human being. Not Jove himself had so colossal and protuberant a forehead, yet the horns and the noselessness and the alligator-like jaw placed things outside all established categories. I debated for a time on the reality of the mummies, half suspecting they were artificial idols, but soon decided they were indeed some Paleogean species which had lived when the nameless city was alive. To crown their grotesqueness, most of them were gorgeously enrobed in the costliest of fabrics, and lavishly laden with ornaments of gold, jewels, and unknown shining metals. The importance of these crawling creatures must have been vast, for they held first place among the wild designs on the fresco walls and ceiling. With matchless skill had the artist drawn them in a world of their own, wherein they had cities and gardens fashioned to suit their dimensions, and I could not help but think that their pictured history was allegorical, perhaps shewing the progress of the race that worshipped them. These creatures, I said to myself, were to men of the nameless city what the she-wolf was to Rome, or some totem beast is to a tribe of Indians. Holding this view, I could trace roughly a wonderful epic of the nameless city, the tale of a mighty seacoast metropolis that ruled the world before Africa rose out of the waves, and of its struggles as the sea shrank away and the desert crept into the fertile valley that held it. I saw its wars and triumphs, its troubles and its defeats, and afterwards its terrible fight against the desert, when thousands of its people, here represented in allegory by the grotesque reptiles, were driven to chisel their way down through the rocks in some marvelous manner to another world whereof their prophets had told them. It was all vividly weird and realistic, and its connection with the awesome descent I had made was unmistakable. I even recognized the passages. As I crept along the corridor toward the brighter light, I saw stages of the painted epic, the leave-taking of the race that had dwelt in the nameless city and the valley around for 10 million years, the race whose souls shrank from quitting scenes their bodies had known so long, where they had settled as nomads in the earth's youth, hewing in the virgin rock those primal shrines at which they had never ceased to worship. Now that the light was better, I studied the pictures more closely, and remembering that the strange reptiles must represent the unknown men and the customs of the nameless city. Many things were peculiar and inexplicable. The civilization, which included a written alphabet, had seemingly risen to a higher order than those immeasurably later civilizations, Egypt and Chaldea. Yet there were curious omissions. I could, for example, find no pictures to represent deaths or funeral customs, save such as were related to wars, violence, and plagues. And I wondered at the reticence shown concerning natural death. It was as though an ideal of immortality had been fostered as a cheering illusion. Still nearer the end of the passage was painted scenes of the utmost picturesque and extravagance, contrasted views of the nameless city and its desertion and growing ruin, and of the strange new realm of paradise to which the race had hewed its way through the storm. In these views the city and the desert valley were shewn always by moonlight, golden nimbus hovering over the fallen walls, and half revealing the splendid perfection of former times, shown spectrally and elusive by the artist. The paradisal scenes were almost too extravagant to be believed, portraying a hidden world of eternal day filled with glorious cities and ethereal hills and valleys. At the very last I thought I saw signs of an artistic anticlimax. The paintings were less skillful and much more bizarre than even the wildest of the earlier scenes. They seemed to record a slow decadence of the ancient stock, coupled with a growing ferocity toward the outside world, from which it was driven by the desert. The forms of the people, always represented by the sacred reptiles, appeared to be gradually wasting away. though their spirit is shown hovering above the ruins by moonlight, gained in proportion. Emaciated priests, displayed as reptiles in ornate robes, cursed the upper air and all who breathed it. And one terrible final scene showed a primitive-looking man, perhaps a pioneer of ancient era, the city of pillars, torn to pieces by members of the elder race. I remember how the Arabs feared the nameless city, and was glad that beyond this place the grey walls and ceiling were bare. As I viewed the pageant of mural history, I had approached very closely to the end of the low-ceiled hall, and was aware of a gate through which came all of the illuminating phosphorescence. Creeping up to it, I cried aloud in transcendent amazement at what lay beyond, for instead of other and brighter chambers, there was only an illimitable void of uniform radiance, such as one might fancy when gazing down from the peak of Mount Everest upon a sea of sunlit mist. Behind me was a passage so cramped that I could not stand upright in it. Before me was an infinity of subterranean effulgence. Reaching down from the passage into the abyss was the head of a steep flight of steps. Small, numerous steps like those of black passages I had traversed, but after a few feet, the glowing vapors concealed everything. Swung back open against the left-hand wall of the passage was a massive door of brass, incredibly thick and decorated with fantastic bas-reliefs, which could have closed and shut the whole inner world of light away from the vaults and passages of rock. I looked at the step, and for the nonce dared not to try them. I touched the open brass door, and could not move it. Then I sank prone to the stone floor, my mind aflame with prodigious reflections which not even a death-like exhaustion could banish. As I lay still with closed eyes, free to ponder, many things I had lightly noted in the frescoes came back to me with new and terrible scenes representing
how's everyone's weekend been so far?
heyday, the vegetations of the valley around it, distant lands with which its merchants traded. The allegory of the crawling creatures puzzled me by its universal prominence, and I wondered that it would be so closely followed in a pictured history of such importance. In the frescoes, the nameless city had been shewn in proportions fitted to the reptiles. I wondered what its real proportions and magnificence had been, and reflected a moment on certain oddities I had noticed in the ruins. I thought curiously of the lowness of the primal temples, and of the underground corridor, which were doubtless hewn thus out of deference to the reptile deities their honor, though it perforce reduced the worshippers to crawling. Perhaps the very rites here involved crawling in imitation of the creatures. No religious theory, however, could easily explain why the level passages in that awesome descent should be as low as the temples, or lower, since one could not even kneel. As I thought of the crawling creatures whose hideous mummified forms were so close to me, I felt a new throb of fear. Mental associations are curious, and I shrank from the idea that except for the poor primitive man torn to pieces in the last painting, mine was the only human form, amidst the many relics and symbols of the primordial life. But as always in my strange, roving existence, wonder soon drove out fear, for the luminous abyss and what it might contain presented a problem worthy of the greatest explorer. That a weird world of mystery lay far down that flight of peculiarly small steps I could not doubt, and I hoped to find there those human memorials which the painted corridor had failed to give. The frescoes had pictured unbelievable cities and valleys in this lower realm, and my fancy dwelt on the rich and colossal ruins that awaited me. My fears indeed concerned the past rather than the future. Not even the physical horror of my position in that cramped corridor of dead reptiles and antediluvian frescoes, miles below the world I knew, faced by another world of eerie light and mist, could match the lethal dread I felt at the abysmal
1 second, everyone. I'll be right back.
Soul. An ancientness so vast that measurement is feeble seemed to leer down from the primal stones and rock-hewn temples of the nameless city, while the very latest of the astounding maps in the frescoes shewed oceans and continents that man has forgotten, with only here and there some vaguely familiar outlines of what could have happened in the geological ages since the painting ceased and the death-hating race resentfully succumbed to decay. No man might say. Life had once teemed in these caverns and in the luminous realm beyond. Now I was alone with vivid relics, and I trembled to think of the countless ages through which these relics had kept a silent, deserted vigil. Suddenly there came another burst of that acute fear which had intermittently seized me ever since I first saw the terrible valley, the nameless city under a cold moon. And despite my exhaustion, I found myself starting frantically to a sitting posture and and gazing back along the black corridor toward the tunnels that rose to the outer world. My sensations were like those which had made me shun the nameless city at night. They were as inexplicable as they were poignant. In another moment, however, I received a still greater shock in the form of a definite sound, the first which had broken the utter silence of these tomb-like depths. It was a deep, low moaning, as of a distant throng of condemned spirits, and came from the direction in which I was staring. Its volume rapidly grew, till it soon reverberated rightfully through the low passage, and at the same time I became conscious of an increasing draught of cold air, likewise flowing from the tunnels in the city above. The touch of this air seemed to restore my balance, for I instantly recalled the sudden gusts which had risen around the mouth of the abyss each sunset and sunrise, one of which had indeed revealed the hidden tunnels to me. I looked at my watch and saw that sunrise was near. So bracing myself to resist the gale that was sweeping down to its cavern home, as it had swept forth at evening, my fear again waned low, since a natural phenomenon tends to dispel broodings over the unknown. More and more madly poured the shrieking, moaning night wind into the gulf of the inner earth. I dropped prone again and clutched vainly at the floor, for fear of being swept bodily through the open gate into the phosphorescent abyss. Such fury I had not expected, and as I grew aware of an actual slipping of my form toward the abyss, I was beset by 1,000 new terrors of apprehension and imagination. The malignancy of the blast awakened incredible fancies. Once more I compared myself shudderingly to the only human image in that frightful corridor, the man who was torn to pieces by the nameless race. For in the fiendish clawing of the swirling currents, there seemed to abide a vindictive rage, all the stronger because it was largely impotent. I think I screamed frantically near the last. I was almost mad of the howling wind wraiths. I tried to crawl against the murderous invisible torrent, but I could not even hold my own as I was pushed slowly and inexorably toward the unknown world. Finally, reason must have wholly snapped, for I fell babbling over and over that unexplainable couplet of the mad Arab Al-Hazred, who dreamed of the nameless city. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons even death may die. Only the grim, brooding desert gods know what really took place, what indescribable struggles and scrambles in the dark I endured, what have guided me back to life, where I must always remember and shiver in the night wind, till oblivion or worse claims me. Monstrous, unnatural, colossal was the thing, too far beyond all the ideas of man to be believed, the silent, damning, small hours of morning when one cannot sleep. I have said that the fury of the rushing blast was infernal, cacodemoniacal, and that its voices were hideous with the pent-up viciousness of desolate eternities. Presently these voices, while still chaotic before me, seemed to my beating brain to take articulate form behind me, and down there in the grave of unnumbered eon-dead antiquities, leagues below the dawn-lit world of men, I heard the ghastly cursing and snarling of strange-tongued fiends. Turning, I saw outlined against the luminous ether of the abyss what could not be seen against the dusk of the corridor. A nightmare whirl of rushing devils, hate-distorted, grotesquely panoplied, half-transparent devils of a race no man might mistake, the crawling reptiles of the nameless city. And as the wind died away, I was plunged into the pooled darkness of the earth's bowels, for behind the last of the creatures, the great brazen door clanged shut, with a deafening peal of metallic music whose reverberations swelled out to the distant world to hail the rising sun, as Memnon hails it from the banks of the Nile. End of The Nameless City.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Durant Hare. Nyarlathotep by H.P. Lovecraft. Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos. I am the last. I will tell the audient void. I do not recall distinctly when it began, but it was months ago. The general tension was horrible. To a season of political and social upheaval was added a strange and brooding apprehension of hideous physical danger, a danger widespread and all-embracing, such a danger as may be imagined only in the most terrible phantasms of the night. I recall that the people went about with pale and worried faces, and whispered warnings and prophecies which no one dared consciously repeat or acknowledge to himself that he had heard. A sense of monstrous guilt was upon the land, and out of the abysses between the stars swept chill currents that made men shiver in dark and lonely places. There was a demoniac alteration in the sequence of the seasons. The autumn heat lingered fearsomely, and everyone felt that the world, and perhaps the universe, had passed from the control of known gods or forces to that of gods or forces which were unknown. And it was then that Nyarlathotep came out of Egypt. Who he was, none could tell, but he was of the old native blood and looked like a pharaoh. The fellaheen knelt when they saw him, yet could not say why. He said he had risen up out of the blackness of 27 centuries, and that he had heard messages from places not on this planet. Into the lands of civilization came Nyarlathotep, swarthy, slender, and sinister, always buying strange instruments of glass and metal, and combining them into instruments yet stranger. He spoke much of the sciences, of electricity and psychology, and gave exhibitions of power which sent his spectators away speechless, yet which swelled his fame to exceeding magnitude. Men advised one another to see Nyarlathotep, and shuddered, and where Nyarlathotep went, rest vanished, for the small hours were rent with the screams of nightmare. Never before had the screams of nightmare been such a public problem. Now the wise men almost wished they could forbid sleep in the small hours, that the shrieks of cities might less horribly disturb the pale, pitying moon as it glimmered on green waters gliding across and old steeples crumbling against a sickly sky. I remember when Nyarlathotep came to my city, the great, old, terrible city of unnumbered crimes. My friend had told me of it, and of the impelling fascination and allurement of his revelations, and I burned with eagerness to explore his uttermost mysteries. My friend said they were horrible and impressive beyond my most fevered imaginings, and what was thrown on a screen in the darkened room prophesied things none but Nyarlathotep dared prophesy, and in the sputter of his sparks there was taken from men that which had never been taken before, yet which shewed only in the eyes. And I heard it hinted abroad that those who knew Nyarlathotep looked on sights which others saw not. It was in the hot autumn that I went through the night with the restless crowd to see Nyarlathotep. Through the stifling night and up the endless stairs into the choking room. And shadowed on a screen I saw hooded forms amidst ruins, and yellow evil faces peering from behind the monuments. And I saw the world battling against the waves of space, whirling, churning, struggling around the dimming, cooling sun. Then the sparks played amazingly around the heads of the spectators, and hair stood up on end, whilst shadows more grotesque than I can tell came out and squatted on the heads. And when I, who was colder and more scientific than the rest, mumbled a trembling protest about imposture and static electricity, Nyarlathotep drove us all out, down the dizzy stairs into the damp, hot, deserted midnight streets. I screamed aloud that I was not afraid, that I never could be afraid, and others screamed with me for solace. We swore to one another that the city was exactly the same, and still alive. And when the electric lights began to fade, we cursed the company over and over again, and laughed at the queer faces we made. I believe we felt something coming down from the greenish moon, for when we began to depend on its light, we drifted into curious involuntary marching formations, and seemed to know our destinations, though we dared not think of it. Once we looked at the pavement and found the blocks loose and displaced by grass, with scarce a line of rusted metal to shew where the tramways had run. And again we saw a tram car, lone, windowless, dilapidated, and almost on its side. When we gazed around the horizon, we could not find the third tower by the river, and noticed that the silhouette of the second tower was ragged at the top. Then we split up into narrow columns, each of which seemed drawn in a different direction. One disappeared in a narrow alley to the left, leaving only the echo of a shocking moan. Another filed down a weed-choked subway entrance, howling with a laughter that was mad. My own column was sucked toward the open country, and presently I felt a chill which was not of the hot autumn. For as we stalked out on the dark moor, we beheld around us the hellish moon-glitter of evil snows. Trackless, inexplicable snows swept asunder in one direction only, where lay a gulf all the blacker for its glittering walls. The column seemed very thin indeed as it plodded dreamily into the gulf. I lingered behind, for the black rift in the green-litten snow was frightful, and I thought I had heard the reverberations of a disquieting wail as my companions vanished. But my power to linger was slight. As if beckoned by those who had gone before, I half floated between the titanic snowdrifts, quivering into the sightless vortex of the unimaginable. Screamingly sentient, dumbly delirious, only the gods that were can tell. A sickened, sensitive shadow writhing in hands that were not hands, and whirled blindly past ghastly midnights of rotting creation, corpses of dead worlds with swords that were cities, charnel winds that brushed the pallid stars and made them flicker low. Beyond the worlds, vague ghosts of monstrous things, half-seen columns of unsanctified temples that rest on nameless rocks beneath space, and reach up to dizzy vacua above the spheres of light and darkness. And through this revolting graveyard of the universe, the muffled, maddening beating of drums, and thin, monotonous whine of blasphemous flutes from inconceivable, unlighted chambers beyond time. The detestable pounding and piping, whereunto dance slowly, awkwardly, and absurdly the gigantic, terrorous, ultimate gods, the blind, voiceless, mindless gargoyles whose soul is Nyarlathotep. End of Nyarlathotep.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra Zena. The Picture in the House by H.P. Lovecraft. Searchers after horror haunt strange, far places. For
Let's go to a different Lovecraft one. Let's go to something different.
Chapter 1 of The Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft. Chapter 1 of The Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft. This legamus recording may be distributed and adapted freely for any purpose. Read by Martin Green. Of such great powers or beings there may be conceivably a survival of a hugely remote period when consciousness was manifested perhaps in shapes and forms long since withdrawn before the tide of advancing humanity, forms of which poetry and legend alone have codifying memory and called them gods, monsters, mythical beings of all sorts and kinds. Algernon Blackwood. Chapter 1. The Horror.
Hey, Caramel Pop, how you doing?
The
Thanks for
most
stopping
merciful
by.
thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid
Hope you and
island
Koga
of
are doing
ignorance
good.
in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but someday the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the light into the peace and safety of a new dark age.
I was smoking on some
the awesome
Gusher.
of the cosmic cycle wherein our world and human race form transient incidents. They have hinted at strange survivals in terms which would freeze the blood if not masked by bland optimism. But it is not from them that there
That's hard to get a good picture of it.
Forbidden aeons which chills me when I think of it and maddens me when I dream of it. That glimpse, like all dead glimpses of truth, flashed out from an accidental piecing together of separated things. In this case, an old newspaper item and the notes of a dead professor.
Yeah, that's
I
definitely
hope
be
that no one else
appreciated.
will accomplish this piecing out. Certainly,
Because it sucks
if I
not being able
live,
to
I
see.
shall never knowingly supply a link in so hideous a chain. I think that the professor, too, intended to keep silent regarding the part he knew, and that he would have destroyed his notes had not sudden death seized him. My knowledge of the thing began in the winter of 1926-27, with the death of my great-uncle, George Gamel Angell, Professor Emeritus of Semitic Languages at Brown University, Providence, Rhode Island. Professor Angell was widely known as an authority on ancient inscriptions.
Yeah, that's about how close I got it.
Been
able to see it. My screen
museums, so that his passing at the age of 92 may be recalled by many. Locally, interest was intensified by the obscurity of the cause of death. The professor had been stricken whilst returning from the Newport boat, falling suddenly, as witnesses said, after having been jostled by a nautical-looking Negro who had come from one of the queer dark courts on the precipitous hillside which formed a shortcut from the waterfront to the deceased's home in William Street. Physicians were unable to find any visible disorder, but concluded after a perplexed debate that some obscure lesion of the heart, induced by the brisk ascent of so steep a hill by so elderly a man, was responsible for the end. At the time, I saw no reason to dissent from this dictum, but latterly I'm inclined to wonder, and more than wonder. As my great-uncle's heir and executor, for he died a childless widower, I was expected to go over his papers with some thoroughness.
But Malia's eyes shone when he spoke of it. Only fools let themselves be ruled.
I have, on the contrary, delved deep.
End of Canto 2. Inferno, Canto 3. Through me the way is to the city Doland. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Corey Samuel. The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. Translated by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Inferno, Canto 1. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost. Ah me, how hard a thing it is to say, what was this forest, savage, rough, and stern, which in the very thought renews the fear. So bitter is it, death is little. But of the good to treat, which there I found, speak will I of the other things I saw there. I cannot well repeat how there I entered. So full was I of slumber at the moment in which I had abandoned the true way. But after I had reached a mountain's foot, at that point where the valley terminated, which had with consternation pierced my heart, upward I looked, and I beheld its shoulders, vested already with that planet's rays, which leadeth others right by every road. Then was the fear a little quieted, that in my heart's lake it endured throughout the night which I had passed so piteously. And even as he who, with distressful breath, forth issued from the sea upon the shore, turns to the water perilous and gazes, so did my soul, that still was fleeing onward, turn itself back to re-behold the pass, which never yet a living person left. After my weary body I had rested, the way resumed I on the desert slope, so that the firm foot ever was the lower. And lo, almost where the ascent began, a panther, light and swift exceedingly, which with a spotted skin was covered o'er, and never moved she from before my face, nay, rather did impede so much my way, that many times I to return had turned. The time was the beginning of the morning, and up the sun was mounting with those stars, that with him were, what time the love divine, at first in motion set those beauteous things. So were to me occasion of good hope, the variegated skin of that wild beast, the hour of time, and the delicious season, but not so much that did not give me fear, a lion's aspect which appeared to me. He seemed as if against me he were coming, with head uplifted, and with ravenous hunger, so that it seemed the air was afraid of him. And a she-wolf, that with all hungerings seemed to be laden in her meagreness, and many folk has caused to live forlorn. She brought upon me so much heaviness, with the affright that from her aspect came, that I the hope relinquished of the height. And as he is who willingly acquires, and the time comes that causes him to lose, who weeps in all his thoughts and is despondent, e'en such made me that beast withouten peace, which, coming on against me by degrees, thrust me back thither where the sun is silent. While I was rushing downward to the lowland, before mine eyes did one present himself, who seemed from long continued silence hoarse. When I beheld him in the desert vast, have pity on me, unto him I cried, whiche'er thou art, or shade, or real man. He answered me, not man, man once I was, and both my parents were of Lombardy, and Mantuans by country both of them. Sub Julio was I born, though it was late, and lived at Rome under the good Augustus, during the time of false and lying gods. A poet was I, and I sang that just, son of Anchises, who came forth from Troy, after that Ilion the superb was burned. But thou, why'st go thou back to such annoyance? Why climb'st thou not the Mount Delectable, which is the source and cause of every joy? Now, art thou that Virgilius, and that fountain which spreads abroad so wide a river of speech? I made response to him, with bashful forehead. Oh, of the other poets, honour and light, avail me the long study and great love that have impelled me to explore thy volume. Thou art my master, and my author thou. Thou art alone the one from whom I took the beautiful style that has done honour to me. Behold the beast, for which I have turned back. Do thou protect me from her, famous sage, for she doth make my veins and pulses tremble. Thee it behooves to take another road, responded he, when he beheld me weeping, if from this savage place thou wouldst escape, because this beast, at which thou criest out, suffers not any one to pass her way, but so doth harass him that she destroys him, and has a nature so malign and ruthless, that never doth she glut her greedy will, and after food is hungrier than before. Many the animals with whom she weds, and more they shall be still, until greyhound comes, who shall make her perish in her pain. He shall not feed on either earth or pelf, but upon wisdom, and on love and virtue. Twixt Feltro and Feltro shall his nation be. Of that low Italy shall he be the saviour, on whose account the maid Camilla died. Euryalus, Turnus, Nisus of their wounds. Through every city shall he hunt her down, till he shall have driven her back to hell, there from whence envy first did let her loose. Therefore I think, and judge it for thy best, thou follow me, and I will be thy guide, and lead thee hence through the eternal place, where thou shalt hear the desperate lamentations, shall see the ancient spirits disconsolate, who cry out each one for the second death. And thou shalt see those who contented are within the fire, because they hope to come, whene'er it may be, to the blessed people. To whom, then, if thou wishest to ascend, a soul shall be for that, the nigh more worthy. With her at my departure I will leave thee, because that emperor who reigns above, in that I was rebellious to his law, wills that through me none come into his city. He governs everywhere, and there he reigns. There is his city and his lofty throne. Oh, happy he whom thereto he elects. And I to him, Poet, I thee entreat, by that same God whom thou didst never know, that I may escape this woe and worse. Thou wouldst conduct me there, where thou hast said, that I may see the portal of St. Peter, and those thou makest so disconsolate. Then he moved on, and I behind him followed. End of Canto 1. Inferno, Canto 2. Day was departing, and the embrowned air released the animals that are on earth from their fatigues, and I, the only one, made myself ready to sustain the war, both of the way, and likewise of the woe, which memory that errs not shall retrace. O Muses, O high genius, now assist me. O memory, that didst write down what I saw, here thy nobility shall be manifest. And I began. Poet, who guidest me, regard my manhood, if it be sufficient, ere to the arduous pass thou dost confide me. Thou sayest, that of Silvius the parent, while yet corruptible, unto the world immortal went, and was there bodily. But if the adversary of all evil was courteous, thinking of the high effect that issue would from him, that who and what, to men of intellect unmeet it seems not, for he was of great Rome, and of her empire, in the imperial heaven as father chosen. The which and what, wishing to speak the truth, was stablished as the holy place, wherein sits the successor of the greatest Peter. Upon this journey, whence thou givest him vaunt, things did he hear, which the occasion were both of his victory and the papal mantle. Thither went afterwards the chosen vessel, to bring back comfort thence unto that faith, which of salvation's way is the beginning.
Well, the medical insurance I have through my disability,
or who concedes it? I not Aeneas am.
it pays for pretty much everything but my my glasses and my dental work.
If I resign
But for my
myself to that,
surgeries, for all my hospital
they'll come and make me
visits,
ill-advised.
it completely pays for that, just not the
And no
glasses for
respect
some
when I
reason.
speak. And as he is, who unwills what he willed, and by new thoughts doth his intention change, so that from his design he quite withdraws.
Which kind of sucks because
On that dark hillside,
I gotta be able to see to be able to do
I consumed the
any type of
eloquence
work.
which was so very prompt in the beginning. If I have well thy language understood, replied that shade of the magnanimous, thy son
Ruled by a king or a queen, by one man.
Right, does suck.
Except Queen Marquise, of course. He put in hastily. She is a fine woman, so I've heard.
They pay thousands of dollars upon thousands of dollars for all the surgeries I've had for all the accidents I've been in, but they don't want to pay $300-400 for a set of glasses and an eye exam. Don't make no damn sense. Hell yeah, Colonel Pop, tell him thank you for me.
But he talked so much in trying to find out what they were up to, and grew so carried away by the sound of his own voice, that he let more slip than he intended. They must travel a great deal serving a great queen like Morgaze. They must have seen many lands. He dreamed of the sea because then he could see lands he had only heard of. Because then he could find the Mayenna oilfish shoals, who would outtrade the sea folk and the filthy Ilioners. And the sea was far from Tarnvala. They must understand that, forced as they were to travel among odd places and people they could not have stomached if they were not serving Queen Morgaze. I never liked ducking there, never knowing who might be using the power. He almost spat the last word. Since he had heard the High Lord Saman speak, though, burn my soul, it makes me feel like hullworms are burrowing into my belly just looking at their white tower now, knowing what they planned. The High Lord Saman said the Aes Sedai meant to rule the world. Saman said they meant to crush every nation, put their foot on every man's throat. Saman said Tyr could no longer hold the power out of its own lands, and believed that was enough. Saman said Tyr had its rightful day of glory coming, but Tarvalin stood between Tyr and glory. There's no hope for it. Sooner or later they will have to be hunted down and killed. The real Aes Sedai. The High Lord Saman says the others might be saved, the young ones, the novices, the accepted, if they're brought to the stone. But the rest must be eradicated. That's what the High Lord Saman says. The White Tower must be destroyed. For a moment, Malia stood in the middle of his cabin, arms full of clothes and books and rolled charts, hair almost brushing the deck beams overhead, staring at nothing with pale blue eyes, while the White Tower tumbled into ruin. Then he gave a start as if realizing what he had just said. His pointed beard waggled uncertainly. That's what he says. I think that may be going too far. The High Lord Saman, he speaks so that he carries a man beyond his own beliefs. If Caemlyn can make covenants with the Tower, why, so can Tyr. He shivered and did not seem to know it. That is what I say. As you say, Matt told him, and felt mischief bubble inside. I think your suggestion is the right one, Captain. But don't stop with a few accept it, though. Ask a dozen Aes Sedai to come, or two. The stone of Tyr would be like 2 dozen
The
Aes Sedai.
prices here are,
Malia shuddered. I will send a man for my money chest, he said.
I think this 1 gram was,
Matt frowned at the closed door. I think I shouldn't have said that.
might have been 16.
That, Tom said dryly. Next, you could try telling the Lord Captain Commander of the White Gloves he should.
Then you could buy 8s, but the 8s here pretty much cost like what they cost on the street. You're paying about $40 to $50 for an 8. So for 3.5 grams, you're pretty much paying between 40 to 50. And the smoke here, you can find
suppose they could have raised a high lord of the
You
land.
find shit on the street fucking 10 times better than what you'll find in the dispensary.
If you had settled for booting some poor fellow
At least for their
back
flour.
instead of taking the captains, we'd each
Their
have to us.
concentrates, their like their
There are
waxes
parts
and
might be.
all and
Now,
whatnot.
Sharon Mullins. I hope
It's
you don't
good,
snore,
but
boy. I cannot
it's-
abide
It's
snoring.
fucking expensive.
Matt grabbed
You're
his
paying
teeth.
excuse me,
Snore like a wood rasp working on a
anywhere
coal
between $40 to $60 for a half a
mine. It was
gram
one of the two large men
of
who sat on
shatter,
house.
butter, or any type of concentrate. You want a full gram, you're paying
He never
almost
said a
80,
word.
90 bucks for a full
Sketchy
gram.
brows, frowned at them when he thought they were not looking, and laughed. Matt was beginning to wonder if the luck that had been with him all night had deserted him at last. He was going
Which
to have to put
really
up with Tom
sucks.
snoring, and truth to tell, it might not have been the best luck in the world to jump onto this particular ship, waving a paper signed by the Amelin seat and sealed with the flame of Tarmalin. On impulse, he pulled out one of his cylindrical leather dice cups, popped off the tight-fitting lid, and upended the dice onto the table. They were spotted dice, and 5 single pips stared up at him. The dark one's eyes, that was called in some games. It was a losing toss in those, a winning in other games. What game might it be? He scooped the dice up, tossed them again. 5 pips.
Right.
Another toss, and again the dark one's eyes winked at him. If you use those dice to win all that gold, Tom said quietly, I wonder you had
Damn,
to by the
that
way
sucks,
you
caramel pop.
He had stripped down to his shirt and had that half over his
Y'all's
his knees were
flour does probably a lot better than what we have.
muscle. The right a little shrunken.
Because some of the flour that we get here
12-year-old girl would cut your heart
at the dispensary, some of it actually still smells and tastes like hay.
It isn't the dice.
They didn't cure it,
It's
or they didn't cure it right.
I said, the dark one's luck. He pushed the dice back into the cup and capped it. I suppose, Tom said, climbing into bed.
And the only reason I was able to get any of this, because I was smoking
I want it. Tonight.
I was smoking resin.
Their dice. Uh-huh.
I was walking to
I suppose you're not going to explain
the
that
store today
around. I saw the seal.
to get me my my drinks for the day, and I ended up finding like $60 on the way to the store.
I am carrying a letter to Morgaze from Elaine, Tom.
So I got to the store, got my drinks, came back to the house, and
I don't know where she
got right to the dispensary.
Well, if you are not going to tell me, I'm going to sleep. Blow out the lamps, will you? Tom rolled on his side and pulled a pillow over his head. Even after Matt had stripped off down to his small clothes, crawled under the blankets, after blowing out the lamps, he could not sleep, though Malia had done well by himself with a good feather mattress. He had been right about Tom's snoring, and that pillow muffled nothing. It sounded as if Tom were cutting wood cross-grain with a rusty saw, and he could not stop thinking. How had Nynaeve and Egwene and Elaine gotten that paper from the Amelin? They had to be involved with the Amelin seat herself, in some plot, one of those white-now machinations. But now that he thought about it, they had to be holding something back from the Amelin, too. Please carry a letter to my mother, Matt, he said softly in a high-pitched, mocking voice. The Amelin would have sent a warder with any letter from the daughter heir to the queen. Blind fool wanted to get out of the tower so bad I couldn't see it. Tom's snore seemed to trumpet agreement. Most of all, though, he thought about luck and footpads. The first bump of something against the stern barely registered on him. He paid no attention to a thump and scuffle from the deck overhead, or the tread of boots. The vessel itself made enough noises. There had to be someone on deck of the ship to make its way downriver. But stealthy footsteps in the passageway leading to his door merged with thoughts of footpads and made his ears prick up. He nudged Tom in the ribs with the elbow. Wake up.
Hey, the goddess, how you doing today?
There's somebody outside in the hall.
Hope you and Stick are
He
doing
was
good.
already easing himself off the bed, hoping the cabin floor, deck, floor, whatever it bloody is, would not creak under his feet. Tom grunted, smacked his lips, and resumed snoring.
How's your day going, Goddess?
The footsteps were right outside. Taking up his quarterstaff, Matt placed himself in front of the door and waited. The door swung open slowly. Two cloaked men, one behind the other, were faintly outlined by dim moonlight through the hatch at the top of the ladder they had crept down. The moonlight was enough to glint off their night clothes. Both men gasped. They obviously had
Oh, I'm not too bad.
waiting for them. Matt thrust with the quarterstaff, catching the first man hard right under where his ribs joined together. He heard his father's voice as he struck. It's a killing blow, Matt. Don't ever use it unless it's your life. But those knives made it for his life. There was no room in the cabin for swinging his staff. Even as the man made a choking sound and folded toward the deck, fighting vainly for breath, Matt stepped forward and drove the end of the quarterstaff over him into the second man's throat with a loud crunch. That fellow dropped his knife to clutch at his throat and fell on top of his companion, both of them scraping their boots across the deck, death rattles already sounding in their throats. Matt stood there, staring down at them. Two men who burned me three. I don't think I ever heard another human being before, and now I've killed three in one night. Silence filled the dark passageway, and he heard the thump of boots on the deck overhead. The crewmen all went barefoot. Trying not to think about what he was doing, Matt ripped the cloak from one of the dead men and settled it around his shoulders, hiding the pale linen of his small clothes. On bare feet, he padded down the passage and climbed the ladder, barely sticking his eyes above the hatch coping. Pale moonlight reflected off the taut sails, but night still covered the deck with shadows. There was no sound except the rush of water along the vessel's sides. Only one man at the tiller, the hood of his cloak pulled up against the chill, seemed to be on deck. The man shifted, and boot leather scuffed on the deck planks. Holding the quarterstaff low, hoping it would not be noticed, Matt climbed on up. He's dead, he muttered in a low, rough whisper. I hope he squealed and you cut his throat. The heavily accented voice was one Matt remembered, calling from the mouth of a twisting street in Tarmalin. This boy, he causes us too much of the trouble. Wait, who are you? Matt swung the staff with all his strength. The thick wood smashed into the man's head, the hood of his cloak only partly muffling a sound like a melon hitting the floor. The man fell across the tiller, shoving it over, and the vessel lurched, staggering Matt. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a shape rising out of the shadows by the railing, and the gleam of a blade. And he knew he would never get his staff around before it struck home. Something else that shone streaked through the night and merged with the dim shape with a dull.
Oh, it's not going too bad, the Goddess. Hope you're having a good Saturday too. Hope you and Stick are both having a good Saturday.
Below decks as the ship swung again, the tiller shifting with the first man's weight. Tom limped from the hatch in cloak and small clothes, raising the shutter on a bullseye's lantern. You were lucky, boy. One of those below had this lantern. Could have set the ship on fire lying there. The light showed a knife hilt sticking up from the chest of a man with dead, staring eyes. Matt had never seen it before. He was sure he would have remembered someone with that many scars on his face. Tom kicked a dagger away from the dead man's outflung hand. To retrieve his own knife.
Hell yeah.
Blade on the corpse's cloak. Very lucky, boy. Very lucky indeed. There was a
I can't complain about today. It's been a good day for me. I found money on the way to walking to the store to get me my drinks, and was able to do a dispensary run.
Two more men stood among the pulled-in oars.
So I have actual smoke to smoke instead of having to smoke resin.
The other darted forward to work frantically at the knot holding the rope. You want to kill these two as well? Tom asked, his voice booming as it did when he performed. No, Tom, Matt said quietly. No. The men in the boat must have heard the question and not the answer, for they abandoned the attempt to free their boat and leaped over the side with great splashes. The sound of them thrashing away across the river was loud. Fools, Tom muttered. The river narrows somewhat after Tarmalin, but it must still be half a mile or more wide here. They'll never make it in the dark. Quiet as stone, came a shout from the hatch. What happens here? There are dead men in the passageway. What's Vasa doing lying on the tiller? He'll run us onto a mud bank. Make it safe for linen underbreeches. Malia dashed to the tiller, hauling the dead man off roughly as he pulled the long lever to put the corset straight again. But is it Vasa? Where my soul? Who are all these dead men? Others were clambering on deck now, barefoot crewmen and frightened passengers wrapped in cloaks and blankets. Shielding his actions with his body, Tom slipped his knife under the rope and severed it in one stroke. The small boat began falling back into the darkness. River brigands, Captain, he said. Young Matt and I have saved your vessel from river brigands. They might have cut everyone's throat if not for us. Perhaps you should reconsider your passage fee. Brigands, Molly exclaimed. There are plenty of those down around Carrion, but I never heard of it this far north. The huddled passengers began to mutter about brigands and having their throats cut. Matt walked stiffly to the hatch. Behind him he heard Malia. He's a cold one. I never heard that Andor employed assassins. Burn my soul, he is a cold one. Matt stumbled down the ladder, stepped over the two bodies in the passage, and slammed the door of the captain's cabin behind him. He made it halfway to the bed before the shaking hit him. Then all he could do was sink down on his knees. Bloody, what game am I playing in?
Hey, James Guy, how you doing today? Thanks for stopping by.
What game? Playing Rose of the Morning softly on his flute, Rand peered into his campfire where a rabbit was roasting on a stick slanting over the flames. A night wind made the flames flicker. He barely noticed the smell of the rabbit, though a vagrant thought did come that he needed to find more salt in the next village or town. Rose of the Morning was one of the tunes he had played at those weddings. How many days ago was that? Were there really so many? Or did I imagine it? Every woman in the village deciding to marry at once. What was its name? Am I going mad already? Sweat beaded on his face, but he played on, barely loud enough to be
If I was playing Gran Turismo, no.
I told him he was Taviran. Everyone said he was Taviran.
I don't think I have that game.
People like that changed things.
In racing games,
Taviran might have
I really suck at racing games.
But that was too close to something he did not want to think about. They say I'm the dragon reborn too. They all say it. The living say it and the dead. It doesn't make it true. I had to let them proclaim me beauty. I had no choice. But that does not make it true. He could not seem to stop playing that one tune. It made him think of Egwene. He had thought once that he would marry Egwene. A long time ago, that seemed. That was gone now.
Oh, that's
She had come in his dreams.
a book I have going. Because I have an Audible account and I have that
Only there had been so many
LibriVox one, which is
faces he knew.
all the books on there fall under public domain, so I could get away with playing them while my live's going. Because I was listening to some H.P. Lovecraft. I was listening to The Call of Cthulhu. And then I was listening to Dante's Inferno. I usually have a book going at the same time I'm playing my game, or the PlayStation 2, depending on what I'm playing anyways. It depends what book you get. As far as the Audible is, they got some books that the total listening time is like 40 hours plus. And the LibriVox one that's on the public domain, some of them are as long as probably about like 5 to 8 hour listening time. Some are shorter. All depends on what book you get. One second here, we're going to be right back. All right. Because at least that, I know I can't get in trouble for. And at least for me, I like listening to books or reading books. But right now, I wouldn't be able to read without giving myself migraines just because how close I'd have to have the book. I put that on. The Man in the Iron Mask.
During the battle, 4 become fast friends. Introduction to The Man in the Iron Mask. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Man in the Iron Mask by Alexandre Dumas, the Elder, or Père. Introduction. In the months of March through July,
And that was an empty bowl.
In the magazine Le Siècle, the first portion of a story by the celebrated playwright Dumas. It was based, he claimed, on some manuscripts he had found a year earlier in the Bibliothèque Nationale while researching a history he planned to write. They chronicled the adventures of a young man named D'Artagnan, who, upon entering Paris, became almost immediately embroiled in court intrigues, international politics.
Yeah, but that he was pretty much
between royal lovers.
empty
Over
bowl.
the next 6 years, readers would enjoy the adventures of this youth and his 3 famous friends, Porthos,
Definitely got to
Athos,
clean
and
it.
Aramis, as their exploits unravel
pretty
behind
much
the scenes of some of the most momentous events
All
in
like
French
that's filled up with resin.
English history. Eventually, these serialized adventures were published in novel form
Can
and
watch.
became the 3 D'Artagnan romances known today. Here is a brief summary of the first 2 novels. The 3 Musketeers. Musketeers, serialized
Get
March
my
through
lungs
July
ready.
1844. The year is 1625. The young D'Artagnan arrives in Paris at the tender age of 18 and almost immediately offends 3 musketeers, Porthos, Aramis, and Athos. Instead of dueling, the 4 are attacked by 5 of the cardinal's guards, and the courage of the youth is made apparent during the battle. The 4 become fast friends, and when asked by D'Artagnan's landlord to find his missing wife, embark upon an adventure that takes them across both France and England in order to thwart the plans of the Cardinal Richelieu. Along the way, they encounter a beautiful young spy named simply Milady, who will stop at nothing to disgrace Queen Anne of Austria before her husband, Louis XIII, and take her revenge upon the 4 friends. 20 years after, serialized January through August 1855. The year is now 1648. 20 years
Colonel
since the
Pop,
close
thanks for
of the
stopping
last
by.
war.
And
Louis XIII
you guys,
has died,
both you two
as
take
has
care
Cardinal
too.
Richelieu. And while the crown of France may sit upon the head of Anne of Austria as regent for the young Louis XIV, the real power resides with the Cardinal Mazarin, her secret husband. D'Artagnan is now a lieutenant of musketeers, and his 3 friends have retired to private life. Athos turned out to be a nobleman, the Comte de la Fère, and has retired to his home with his son, Raoul de Bragelonne. Aramis, whose real name is D'Herblay, has followed his intention of shedding the musketeer's cassock for the priest's robes. And Porthos has married a wealthy woman who left him her fortune upon her death. But trouble is stirring in both France and England. Cromwell menaces the institution of royalty itself while marching against Charles I. And at home, the Fronde is threatening to tear France apart. D'Artagnan brings his friends out of retirement to save the threatened English monarch. But Mordaunt, the son of Milady, who seeks to avenge his mother's death at the musketeers' hands, thwarts their valiant efforts. Undaunted, our heroes return to France just in time to help save the young Louis XIV, quiet the Fronde, and tweak the nose of Cardinal Mazarin. The 3rd novel, The Vicomte de Bragelonne, serialized October 1847 through January 1850, has enjoyed a strange history in its English translation. It has been split into 3, 4, or 5 volumes at various points in its history. The 5-volume edition generally does not give titles to the smaller portions, but the others do. In the 3-volume edition, the novels are entitled The Vicomte de Bragelonne, Louise de la Vallière, and The Man in the Iron Mask. For the purposes of this e-text, I have chosen to split the novel as the 4-volume edition does, with these titles: The Vicomte de Bragelonne, 10 years after, Louise de la Vallière, and The Man in the Iron Mask.
All right, everyone. I'm going to call into this live for now. Thanks to everyone for stopping by, and everyone keep stopping by and showing love and support. Till next time, everyone. Hope we'll come out.